Linnea, you owe this family your life. Sign over that $2.5 million estate right now, or watch your mother and sister freeze on the streets because of your cruelty. That was the exact, unforgiving message my mother, Rowena, dropped into our family group chat of 30 relatives on a freezing Saturday morning in Minneapolis. I was standing in the kitchen of the home I had purchased, gutted, and renovated entirely on my own, holding a steaming mug of black coffee. The winter wind was howling against the frosted glass of my tall windows, rattling the frames with a violent force. But the chill that ran down my spine and settled deep into my bones came entirely from the glowing screen of my phone. For 33 years, I had been the invisible child, the designated scapegoat, and the emotional punching bag of a family that treated my younger sister, Callista, like absolute royalty. And now, my mother was demanding the key to everything I had built, claiming it was her rightful compensation for simply giving birth to me. She painted a profound, devastating picture of victimhood in that digital town square. She wrote a massive wall of text, detailing how I had supposedly bought up her mortgage debt in secret, acting as a shadow landlord, just so I could throw her out into the harsh Minnesota winter right before the holidays. She claimed I was doing it out of pure, unadulterated jealousy of my sister's success. The notifications began to chime in rapid succession. The sound echoed off my marble countertops. Ping, ping, ping. It was a digital firing squad, and I was tied to the post. Uncle Thaddeus was the first to attack. He called me a monster, stating that I had always been a rotten seed and that this betrayal was the final straw. Aunt Delphine demanded I hand over my property immediately to atone for my supposed cruelty, writing that she was physically sick to her stomach knowing she shared blood with me. Cousin after cousin chimed in. They called me heartless. They called me a disgrace. They demanded I fix the nightmare I had supposedly created. I stood there in the quiet of my kitchen, watching the insults scroll past. I did not shed a single tear. My hands did not shake. I felt entirely icy, completely detached from the manufactured hysteria unfolding on my screen. Growing up, I would have crumbled under the heavy weight of their collective disappointment. I would have hyperventilated, crying until my eyes were swollen shut. I would have begged for a scrap of their approval, working myself to the bone, apologizing for things I never even did, just to hear my mother say she was proud of me. But looking at the screen now, surrounded by the quiet luxury of the life I had built from nothing, my professional instincts flared to life, burning away any remaining childhood fear. I work as a senior forensic underwriter for a massive commercial insurance firm. My entire career, my daily existence, is built on hunting down missing money. I spend my days exposing lies in complex ledgers, analyzing financial risk, and destroying the carefully constructed illusions of corporate fraudsters. In my world, emotions are irrelevant. Numbers are the only things that tell the truth, and the story my mother was trying to tell made absolutely zero sense. Rowena had always functioned as the supreme queen of our family empire, dictating who was worthy of love, who received grace, and who was destined to serve. She was a woman utterly obsessed with appearances. She never left the house without her signature pearls and a full face of perfectly applied makeup. She spent her weekends bragging at the local country club about her flawless life and her brilliant children, carefully omitting my existence unless she needed a punchline. She wore her debt-free status like a glittering crown, often mocking other family members for their financial struggles. So, if this woman was suddenly facing the streets, she was hiding a massive, catastrophic financial disaster. But why target my estate? My property was not just a house, it was a sprawling, $2.5 million commercial and residential estate that I had literally rebuilt from a pile of crumbling brick and rotting wood. It had a beautifully restored historic main house where I lived, and 2 highly profitable, fully leased rental units on the back of the lot. If someone is simply getting foreclosed on and desperately needs a safe place to stay, they ask for a spare bedroom. They ask to crash on a couch. They might even ask for a small apartment to rent cheaply. They do not demand the deed and absolute legal ownership of a multi-million-dollar income-producing estate as an apology gift. She was looking for a snare, and she wanted me to be the prey. She wanted to trap me, consume my resources, and leave me with nothing, just as she had always tried to do. I muted the chaotic group chat, walked over to my heavy oak desk in the corner of the room, and set my coffee down. I refused to be hunted in my own territory. I opened my laptop, the fan whirring softly in the otherwise silent room. I was about to dig into the public county records, but my mind kept flashing back to the past, reminding me exactly who I was dealing with. I intended to ignore her theatrics, as I always did. I thought about just blocking her number, changing my locks, and walking away forever. But then I realized a fatal flaw in her meticulously crafted message. A normal person drowning in debt asks for a life vest. My mother was demanding an entire luxury yacht. Why my commercial estate? Why the desperate rush for a deed transfer rather than just a place to sleep? I realized she was not looking for shelter. She was looking for a high-value, liquid asset. I intended to let it go until I realized this massive, illogical detail in her threat. A normal foreclosed person just needs a small roof over their head. Why did she aim straight for my commercial estate? Before I typed a single search query into the county database, the ghosts of my past flooded the room, heavy and suffocating. If you want to truly understand why I felt no pity for the woman claiming she was about to freeze on the winter streets, you have to walk through my personal museum of pain. Every child raised by a toxic parent has one. It is a mental collection of memories, preserved in crystal clear, agonizing detail, proving that the cruelty was never an accident, never a misunderstanding. It was a calculated feature of the system. The first exhibit in my museum was the day of my college graduation. I had worked 3 grueling part-time jobs to pay for my degree in finance. I spent my nights scrubbing floors at a local bakery and my weekends doing data entry, studying until my eyes bled while surviving on cheap instant noodles and tap water. I took out 0 loans. I did it all myself. The day I finally graduated at the top of my class, receiving academic honors, we were supposed to have a small family dinner. Just a simple, inexpensive meal at a local Italian restaurant to acknowledge my achievement. I had bought a cheap dress from a thrift store and ironed it until it looked brand new. But 2 hours before the reservation, as I was putting on my shoes, Rowena called. Her voice was flat, devoid of any warmth. She told me she was canceling the dinner. Callista had just broken up with her flavor-of-the-month boyfriend and was feeling overwhelmingly sad. The entire family was rallying around my 21-year-old sister, holding her hand while she cried over a guy she had known for exactly 3 weeks. I ate my graduation dinner alone at a cheap, 24-hour diner, listening to the rain hit the windows, staring at my expensive degree sitting in a cheap cardboard folder on the sticky table. The second exhibit was the brutal winter of my senior year in high school. My school was miles away from our suburban neighborhood, and I had a job bussing tables after classes to save money for college applications. Because I had no car, I rode a rusted, hand-me-down bicycle through the unforgiving, blinding Minneapolis snowstorms. I would come home near midnight with my fingers completely numb and blue, my cheap boots soaked through with freezing slush, my lungs burning from the icy air. One night, after nearly getting hit by a sliding snowplow, I begged Rowena for a cheap, used car. Just a beater to get me safely from point A to point B. I offered to pay her back every single penny with my tips. She looked at me over the rim of her teacup and told me we simply did not have the budget for such ridiculous luxuries, adding that hardship builds character and I needed to stop being so dramatic. Exactly 3 days later, for Callista's sweet 16th birthday party, Rowena blindfolded my sister and led her to the driveway. Sitting there, with a massive red bow on the hood, was a brand-new convertible sports car financed with a high-interest loan. Rowena cheered and clapped while I stood shivering on the porch, my hands shoved deep into my pockets, feeling the frostbite still tingling in my toes. The third exhibit was perhaps the most defining moment of our relationship. When I finally saved enough money from my early underwriting jobs to purchase my very first home, a run-down fixer-upper on the edge of town, I felt a surge of genuine, overwhelming pride. I had spent months scraping wallpaper, sanding floors, and painting walls until my shoulders ached. I invited Rowena over foolishly, desperately hoping that seeing my name on a property deed would finally earn her respect. She walked through the front door wearing a designer coat and her heavy perfume. She immediately pinched her nose, looking around the living room with utter disgust. She loudly complained about the smell of cheap paint and the uneven floorboards. When I handed her a shiny new spare key, wanting her to feel welcome in my space, she did not even put it in her purse. She dropped it right onto the dusty floorboards, letting it clatter against the wood. She looked at me with cold, dismissive eyes and said, "This place is only fit for someone with no future." Those memories played in my head now like a scratched record, loud and undeniable. The irony was so thick I could practically choke on it. The exact same woman who told me my home was fit for a failure was now orchestrating a massive digital mob to steal my $2.5 million estate. My phone buzzed again, violently vibrating against the wood of my desk, breaking my intense concentration. Aunt Delphine had escalated her tactics beyond the family chat. She had gone onto my local neighborhood community Facebook page, a group with over 2,000 residents, and posted an anonymous, highly detailed smear campaign. She wrote a long, dramatic post claiming that a local female finance executive living in the historic estate on Elm Street was forcefully evicting her elderly, frail mother just weeks before the holidays. She did not use my exact name, but she described my house, my profession, and my car perfectly. I refreshed the page and watched the comments piling up. People I waved to on my morning runs were expressing absolute disgust. They were calling me a monster, a sociopath, demanding to know how someone could be so cruel to their own flesh and blood. The flying monkeys were trying to burn my reputation to the ground in my own community. They wanted to isolate me completely. They wanted the crushing pressure of public shame and family hatred to break my spirit until I signed those property papers just to make the screaming stop. They thought the immense weight of the crowd would force me to surrender and hand over everything I owned. But they forgot one crucial, terrifying detail about who I had become. My entire career revolves around tearing apart liars, and my mother had just left a massive, bloody trail in the fresh snow. How deep did her lies go, and what exactly was she hiding from the bank? I pushed the boiling anger down, locking it away in a tight, dark box inside my chest. This was not the time for emotion. Emotion makes you sloppy. Emotion makes you miss the small, vital details hiding in the fine print. This was the time for cold, hard data. I opened a fresh tab on my secure browser and logged directly into the Hennepin County Public Property Records portal. It is a complex municipal system I use every single day to verify commercial assets and land deeds for my underwriting firm. It took me less than 5 minutes of navigating the clunky government interface to bypass the smoke and mirrors of my mother's country club facade. Rowena had always loudly bragged about paying off her large, four-bedroom suburban house 5 years ago. She used to hold court at our mandatory family Thanksgiving gatherings, sitting at the head of the table, dispensing unsolicited financial advice to anyone who would listen. She weaponized her debt-free status to make my cousins feel small and inadequate. According to the county deed records blinking on my screen, she had indeed paid off her original 30-year mortgage. But 2 years ago, a new, massive document was filed against the property. It was a high-interest, adjustable-rate line of credit taken out against the total equity of her home. I scrolled down to the principal amount, and the number sitting on my screen made my jaw clench so hard my teeth ached. $900,000. 4 weeks ago, the lending bank had filed a formal public notice of default. Her lies were unraveling. She really was losing her house. The bank was coming to collect their money, and the legal foreclosure process was already in full, unstoppable motion. But I am a forensic underwriter. I do not just look at the numbers. I look at the space between the numbers. I look at the behavioral logic of the transaction. If she truly owed $900,000 and was simply desperate to keep a roof over her head, why was she trying to extort a commercial estate worth $2.5 million from me? If she just needed to pay off the angry bank to save her suburban home, she could have begged the family for a collective loan. She could have downsized to a smaller townhouse. Instead, she wanted my deed. She wanted absolute control of my most valuable asset. I pushed my chair back, walked over to the large glass whiteboard hanging on my home office wall, and grabbed a red dry erase marker. I started writing out the timeline and the figures, my handwriting sharp and aggressive. Home value, $1.2 million. Debt owed to the bank, $900,000. Target asset requested, my $2.5 million estate. There was a staggering, gaping discrepancy in the math. People who are genuinely drowning in debt do not demand an asset worth nearly triple their outstanding balance unless they are trying to cover up something much, much darker. I walked back to my laptop and started pulling up her credit history using a legal, premium background check service my company subscribes to for deep-level investigations. The results loaded, and it was an absolute bloodbath. Rowena had completely maxed out every single credit card she owned. There were tens of thousands of dollars in high-end retail debt, luxury international vacations, daily expensive spa treatments, and premium dining. She was bleeding cash from every possible pore just to maintain the illusion of immense wealth to her friends. But even with the mountain of credit card debt, the $900,000 cash withdrawal from the house made absolutely no sense. Rowena was incredibly vain and financially foolish, but she was not a gambler. She did not invest in volatile business ventures or the stock market. She was a pure consumer. You cannot physically spend $900,000 on designer dresses and steak dinners in just 2 years without leaving a massive paper trail of physical, tangible assets. The money had simply vanished into thin air, leaving nothing behind but legal notices. I stared at the red numbers on the whiteboard until my eyes ached and blurred. There was a missing hole in the ledger, a massive black void that threatened to swallow my entire family if I let it pull me in. In my highly specialized line of work, a missing hole that large means someone is desperately trying to cover their tracks before a larger, more dangerous authority finds out what they did. I was standing there, scratching my head over this massive $900,000 hole, feeling like I was missing a crucial piece of the puzzle. The silence in my house was deafening. I needed more data, more context, but I had hit a dead end in the public records. I went to bed that night with the numbers swimming in my vision. But I did not have to wait long for the answer. The missing puzzle piece boldly walked right into my secure office lobby on Monday morning, wearing a $4,000 designer coat and screaming my name. What exactly did Callista want, and how did she fit into this massive financial crater? Monday morning arrived with a brutal, biting freeze that turned the city's sidewalks into sheets of solid ice. I was sitting at my desk on the 14th floor of my corporate building, nursing my second cup of terrible breakroom coffee and reviewing a perfectly legitimate commercial insurance claim when my desk phone rang loudly. It was the security desk down in the main lobby. The head guard, a usually unflappable man named Marcus, sounded incredibly stressed. "Ma'am, I am so sorry to bother you, but there is a woman down here causing a severe disturbance. She claims to be your younger sister and says it is an absolute family emergency. She is demanding to be let upstairs immediately." I sighed deeply, pinching the bridge of my nose, feeling a headache beginning to form behind my eyes. "Send her up to the glass conference room by the elevators. Do not, under any circumstances, let her onto the main underwriting floor. I will be right out." I locked my computer screen and walked out to the expansive reception area just as the silver elevator doors slid open. Callista marched out, looking every bit the fake, wealthy lifestyle entrepreneur she pretended to be on the internet. She was 32 years old, but still operated with the emotional regulation of a spoiled teenager. She called herself the CEO and founder of a wellness brand called Retreat, which, as far as I could tell, consisted entirely of her selling overpriced, repackaged essential oils and cheap crystals on social media while constantly preaching about toxic energy and inner peace. Today, her energy was purely manic. She was wearing a stunning, pristine white cashmere coat that I knew for a fact retailed for at least $4,000. She stormed past the bewildered receptionist, her designer heels clicking aggressively on the polished marble floor, and pointed a perfectly manicured finger directly at my face. You are ruining the family's vibrational frequency." She screamed, her shrill voice echoing through the normally quiet, highly professional office space. I stood my ground, looking at her, my face a mask of total, unbreakable indifference. "Keep your voice down, Callista. You are in a place of business, not a playground. Mom is having severe panic attacks because of your cold, dead heart," she yelled, ignoring my warning entirely. She lunged forward, grabbed a heavy, decorative glass vase full of water and flowers from the reception desk, and slammed it back down onto the counter with terrifying force. It shattered instantly into jagged pieces, freezing water and decorative stones spilling across the polished marble floor. Several of my senior colleagues stood up from their cubicles, peering over the fabric partitions in shock. My department director stepped out of his corner office, his arms crossed tight across his chest, watching the chaotic scene with deep, visible disapproval. "Sign the property papers, Linnea." Callista shrieked, her face turning an ugly, blotchy shade of red, the veins popping in her neck. "You owe us this. My company, Retreat, is facing a minor liquidity issue right now. If you do not give Mom your house so she can fix this temporary setback, you are literally killing my dreams. You are a toxic, incredibly jealous monster." I did not raise my voice. I simply signaled the two security guards who had rushed up from the lobby right behind her. As they firmly grabbed her arms and began to drag her backward toward the open elevator doors, she continued to kick wildly and scream about her vibrational energy and my supposed cruelty. I turned to my director, apologizing quietly and promising to personally pay for the broken vase and the cleanup. I walked back to my desk, my posture perfectly straight. But once I sat down, my hands began shaking. Not from fear, and certainly not from shame, but from the sheer, overwhelming adrenaline of the revelation I had just been handed. Callista thought humiliating me at my highly respected place of work would break my spirit. She thought the threat of public professional pressure would force me to quickly comply just to save face. But she was far too arrogant, and far too stupid, to realize what she had just done. In her violent tantrum, screaming about a minor liquidity issue, she had handed me the exact key I needed to open her dirty, rotten treasure chest. What was really happening inside her fake wellness company? I sat down at my dual monitors, my mind racing faster than it ever had. Callista had specifically mentioned a liquidity issue with her fake wellness company, Retreat. But a small-scale, internet-based essential oil pyramid scheme does not consume $900,000 of stolen home equity. You cannot spend that much money buying glass bottles and lavender oil. I opened our highly restricted internal corporate underwriting database. My insurance company provides massive surety bonds and complex commercial liability policies for medium to large businesses across the entire Midwest. On a sudden, wild hunch, I typed Retreat Lifestyle LLC into the global search bar, holding my breath as the loading icon spun. The ironic, beautiful twist of fate hit me like a physical blow to the chest. Callista's company was in our proprietary system. A little over a year ago, her firm had aggressively applied for a massive commercial expansion bond to supposedly open brick and mortar retail locations. The file had actually passed through my specific department, though it was handled and ultimately rejected by a junior analyst while I was on vacation. I quickly opened the digitized folder and started reading the attached financial disclosures. While I was rapidly scanning the tax documents, my phone pinged with a LinkedIn notification. It was a direct, private message from a man named Cashin. I recognized the name immediately from the corporate filings I was just looking at. He was legally listed as Callista's former silent business partner and initial angel investor. The message read, "Linnea, I saw your aunt's crazy post on the community Facebook page. I do not care about your personal family drama, but you need to know the absolute truth before you do something stupid. Your sister conned me, and she is trying to con you. She never invested a single dime of that money into Retreat. She used our company lines of credit to fund a massive, out-of-control gambling addiction. She was flying off to Macau and Vegas on private charters every other weekend, playing high-stakes baccarat in VIP rooms. She burned through absolutely everything. She is completely broke and in deep with very bad people. I stared at the glowing screen, my blood running entirely cold, freezing in my veins. I carefully cross-referenced Cashin's explosive claims with the rejected financial disclosures in Callista's bond application. The numbers began to align with terrifying, undeniable precision. The massive cash withdrawals, the wire transfers to offshore accounts, the sudden collapse of her operating capital. But the true horror did not stop there. The bond application clearly showed the total amount of debt Callista's company had officially accrued before completely collapsing. It was not $900,000. The true, gaping hole was $1.8 million. My mother had secretly drained her home equity of $900,000 in cash to try and quietly bail Callista out of her massive gambling debts, likely terrified of violent loan sharks or impending federal wire fraud charges. But that desperate move only covered exactly half the damage. I finally understood, with crystal clarity, why Rowena wanted my $2.5 million estate and not just a place to sleep. She had absolutely no intention of ever moving in. I booted up a secure browser, bypassed standard search engines, and searched the dark web and unregulated, private real estate broker forums using my professional investigative credentials. It took some digging, but I found the listing. Rowena had already contacted a known black market real estate flipper. She was promising a quick, off-market, cash-only sale of my beautiful estate for a mere $1.5 million, ready to execute the very moment the deed was transferred into her name. She was going to sell my life's work, my pride and joy, for pennies on the dollar just to hand the dirty cash over to Callista's dangerous creditors. They were going to completely destroy my future to pave over Callista's disgusting sins. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, feeling a dark, incredibly heavy rage settling deep in the pit of my stomach. The math was finally getting clearer. $1.8 million owed in total. $900,000 taken from my mother's soon-to-be foreclosed house. That left a remaining $900,000 gap. If they aggressively needed my house to cover the rest, fine. But looking closely at the detailed bank statements Cashin had helpfully forwarded me, I noticed something else. Something terrifying. There was a recent, massive influx of cash deposited directly into Callista's frozen corporate accounts. Exactly $400,000, wired seamlessly from a domestic trust fund just 3 short weeks ago. Where on earth did that money come from? Rowena had no other liquid assets. Callista was completely, thoroughly broke. I traced the routing number attached to the wire transfer through a secure financial registry. When the official name of the originating account popped up on my screen in bold black letters, my heart physically stopped beating in my chest. What had my mother done? The screen displayed a name I never, ever expected to see tangled in this disgusting web of financial filth. The Theodora Estate Irrevocable Medical Trust. Grandma Theodora. She was 84 years old, a frail widow, sitting in a wheelchair in one of the most expensive, high-end assisted living facilities in the entire state. Before my grandfather passed away many years ago, he had been a brilliant, highly paranoid businessman. He knew exactly who his daughter was. He knew Rowena was incredibly reckless, vain, and terrible with money. So, before he died, he set up an ironclad, irrevocable medical trust fund designed exclusively to pay for Grandma Theodora's late-stage, specialized care. The fund was legally untouchable for anything other than verified medical expenses, but because of archaic family trust laws, Rowena was named as the sole administrative manager of the account. Rowena had actually stolen $400,000 from her own disabled mother's end-of-life care fund to pay off her golden child's sickening gambling debts. This was no longer a petty, toxic family dispute about a house or a bruised ego. This was textbook elder financial abuse. This was a severe, undeniable federal crime that carried mandatory prison time. I slammed my laptop shut so hard the plastic cracked slightly. I grabbed my heavy wool coat and left the office without saying a word to anyone. I did not care that it was the middle of the afternoon on a busy Tuesday. I drove straight into the teeth of a rapidly brewing, violent snowstorm. My tires slipped and slid dangerously on the icy highway as I made my way to the upscale assisted living community located on the outskirts of the city. My knuckles were completely white gripping the steering wheel. As the wipers fought against the heavy snow, I thought about every single time Rowena had stood at a family gathering, holding a glass of expensive wine, dabbing her dry eyes with a lace handkerchief, weeping about how incredibly hard it was to manage Grandma's rapidly declining mental health. She played the role of the devoted, exhausted, loving daughter so perfectly. She used Grandma's supposed dementia to constantly garner deep sympathy and attention from our gullible relatives. She made everyone believe Grandma was entirely out of her mind. When I finally pulled into the plowed parking lot of the massive facility, the wind was howling, stinging my face like tiny needles. I walked through the automatic sliding glass doors, flashing my driver's license at the front desk, and marched down the pristine, thickly carpeted hallway toward room 412. I expected to find a fragile, deeply confused old woman staring blankly at a television. I expected an elder who had been cruelly and easily taken advantage of by her own flesh and blood. I expected to have to sit down, hold her frail hands, and gently break the horrific news that her own daughter had financially ruined her, that she might soon be evicted from this beautiful, safe facility and sent to a grim, state-run ward because the money was entirely gone. Thank you for watching this video. Before I take you back there, do me one small favor. Take a second to like and subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you are watching from and what time it is where you are. It helps more than you know. I reached out with a trembling hand and pushed open the heavy oak door to room 412. The room was incredibly warm, smelling faintly of soothing lavender and expensive chamomile tea. My mother played the devoted daughter, weeping about Grandma's dementia and failing mind. But pushing open that heavy wooden door, stepping into the quiet room, I realized with a massive shock that I was not the only one acting. What exactly was Grandma Theodora doing in there? I pushed open the heavy, polished oak door to room 412, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I was completely bracing myself for a heartbreaking scene. I expected to find a broken, deeply confused victim of elder abuse. I expected to see a frail woman staring blankly at a television screen, entirely unaware that her own daughter had just financially ruined her final years on Earth. Instead, stepping into that warm, lavender-scented room, I found a seasoned predator quietly waiting in the tall grass. Grandma Theodora was not drooling. She was not muttering incoherently as my mother constantly and tearfully claimed at every single family holiday. She was sitting perfectly upright in her comfortable, velvet-backed ergonomic wheelchair, positioned strategically by the large bay window overlooking the snow-covered, meticulously landscaped courtyard. She was wearing a crisp, elegant silk blouse, her silver hair perfectly styled and pinned back. She was calmly knitting a thick, beautiful burgundy scarf, her gnarled but incredibly steady fingers moving the silver needles with a rhythmic, mesmerizing precision. A sleek tablet computer rested on the adjustable table beside her, brightly displaying what looked like live, complex stock market tickers and financial news feeds. She stopped knitting the very second I entered the room. She looked up at me over the thin rim of her expensive reading glasses. Her eyes, a sharp, piercing shade of steel gray, locked instantly onto mine. There was absolutely no fog in her gaze. There was no dementia, no confusion, no weakness. There was only a terrifying, razor-sharp clarity that made me instantly stand up straighter. "Linnea," she said, her voice completely steady, resonant, and entirely lacking any of the frail, pitiful tremor I had heard her use during family dinners. "You look like you just saw a terrifying ghost. Or, more accurately, considering your profession, you look like you just discovered exactly where all the missing money went. Close the heavy door and lock the deadbolt behind you." I stood completely frozen for a long second, my hand still resting on the brass door handle, before my shocked brain finally caught up with the surreal reality of the situation. I stepped fully inside, pushed the heavy door shut until it clicked, and turned the metal deadbolt. I walked over slowly and sat heavily on the edge of her perfectly made, floral-patterned bed, my hands still shaking slightly from the freezing outdoor wind and the massive adrenaline rush. "You know?" I whispered, my voice barely working, sounding incredibly small in the quiet room. "You know what Rowena did to you? You know she actively stole $400,000 from your irrevocable medical trust fund?" Grandma Theodora let out a dry, dark, humorless chuckle that sounded like dry leaves scraping across a stone patio. She carefully placed her knitting down on her lap, smoothed the burgundy yarn, and leaned forward, her gray eyes boring into my soul. "My dear, brilliant girl, I have known every single time your mother has tried to steal a penny since she was 16 years old, stealing cash from your grandfather's wallet. Did you honestly, truly think I would let a foolish, vain woman like Rowena legally manage my entire life and my medical well-being without a highly secure contingency plan? Your grandfather was an incredibly paranoid, brilliant businessman, and he taught me very well how to protect myself from parasites. Even the ones sharing my own blood." She reached her thin hand deep into the side storage pocket of her wheelchair and pulled out a small, heavy brass key attached to a simple black ribbon. She tossed it casually onto the bedspread right next to my shaking hands. "That little piece of metal is the physical key to a private, highly secure post office box located in the downtown city center," she explained, her voice dropping to a low, conspiratorial whisper. "I secretly opened it 3 full years ago using a private, bonded courier service that Rowena knows absolutely nothing about. The bank is under strict legal instructions to send duplicate, certified paper copies of every single transaction from my medical trust fund directly to that specific box. I have watched your mother slowly, greedily siphon off small, insignificant amounts for years to buy her ugly pearl necklaces and fund her pathetic, overpriced country club memberships. I let the small theft slide because, quite frankly, it was easier than fighting with her exhausting theatrics. But when she stupidly forged my legal signature to wire $400,000 directly into Callista's fake essential oil company 3 weeks ago, she crossed a massive legal line that I will absolutely not allow her to return from. She thinks she is a mastermind, but she is just a sloppy thief." I stared at the small brass key resting on the floral quilt, my mind completely blown into a million pieces. My mother had spent years aggressively convincing the entire family that Grandma was losing her mind. She used the fake dementia as a massive, impenetrable shield to gain absolute, unquestioned control over her finances. And all the while, Grandma had been sitting right here in this expensive room, playing the pathetic fool, quietly and meticulously gathering an insurmountable, legally binding mountain of paper evidence. "Why didn't you go straight to the police the minute the $400,000 was transferred?" I asked, still desperately trying to process the sheer magnitude of her brilliant deception. "Because hitting a rat with a broom only makes it scurry back into the walls to hide," she replied, her eyes narrowing with a cold, highly calculated fury. "If you want to eliminate a destructive pest permanently, you have to wait patiently until it is standing directly in the dead center of the trap before you pull the heavy lever. Rowena actually thinks she has outsmarted everyone in this family. She truly believes her little pathetic plan to publicly steal your $2.5 million estate will perfectly solve all her massive financial problems. We are going to let her believe she has entirely won. We are going to let her climb up onto the stage before we pull the trapdoor open." She picked up her sleek tablet and tapped the glowing screen a few times with a stylus. "I have already taken the liberty of contacting a very specialized, very powerful professional. Have you ever heard of a man named Gideon Vance? He is a senior, highly feared auditor for the State Financial Regulatory Board. He is also a very old, very dear friend of your late grandfather. I securely sent him the forged wire transfer documents yesterday morning via my private courier. He is quietly preparing massive federal indictments and asset freezes as we speak." My cell phone violently buzzed in my heavy wool coat pocket, completely interrupting the surreal, cinematic moment. I pulled it out. It was a new, high-priority notification from the toxic family group chat. Rowena had just sent a new, incredibly aggressive, demanding message to all 30 relatives. "Friday night. Le Petit Restaurant downtown. 7 o'clock sharp. You will bring the notarized property transfer deeds for your estate. The entire family will be there to witness your formal apology and your signature. If you do not show up and do the right thing to save your mother and sister, you are dead to this family forever. You will be completely cut off. I read the demanding message out loud to Grandma Theodora, my voice dripping with pure disgust. She smiled. It was a chilling, absolutely genuine smile that sent a freezing shiver straight down my spine. It was the terrifying smile of a brilliant woman who was about to comfortably watch her enemies burn all the way to the ground. Tell her you will absolutely be there, Grandma instructed softly, picking her knitting needles back up. Tell her you humbly agree to all her terms. Remember this, Linnea. Never, ever interrupt your enemy when they are aggressively making a fatal mistake. I looked down at the glowing screen of my phone. The flying monkeys in the chat, Aunt Delphine, Uncle Thaddeus, and a dozen cousins, were already cheering Rowena on, prematurely celebrating my impending, humiliating surrender. I typed a single, simple word and hit send. Agreed. I looked back up at my grandmother, feeling a sudden, intensely powerful bond with this brilliant woman I had barely truly known my entire life. We spent the next 2 solid hours meticulously plotting every single detail of the trap. We synchronized our timelines, double-checked the forged bank statements against my digital forensic files, and thoroughly confirmed the exact involvement of the state auditor. By the time I finally left the facility and stepped back out into the raging, freezing Minnesota snowstorm, I no longer felt angry. I felt incredibly, powerfully, terrifyingly calm. Rowena thought she was setting up a grand public execution to publicly steal my life's work and humiliate me. But what exactly was she going to do when the heavy steel guillotine blade dropped squarely on her own neck instead? Friday night finally arrived, carrying with it a bitter, biting chill in the air that seemed to completely freeze the very oxygen in the city streets. The snow had stopped, but the temperature had plummeted dangerously low. I pulled my warm SUV into the brightly lit valet line of Le Petit, easily one of the most exclusive, ridiculously expensive, and pretentious French restaurants in downtown Minneapolis. I handed the keys to the shivering valet attendant, tipped him a crisp $20 bill, and stepped out into the freezing wind. I was wearing a sharply tailored, dark charcoal designer business suit, a crisp white silk blouse, and my most expensive, intimidating black heels. I did not dress for a warm family dinner. I dressed for a corporate slaughter. I walked confidently through the heavy revolving glass doors, projecting the absolute, unbreakable, terrifying calm of a woman who held every single winning card in the deck and was simply waiting to lay them out. The nervous hostess verified my name and led me to a massive, highly exclusive private dining room situated at the very back of the bustling restaurant. The room was incredibly opulent, dripping with unnecessary wealth. It featured heavy, dark red velvet curtains, massive crystal chandeliers that fractured the light, and walls lined with expensive, vintage wine bottles behind glass. A long, heavily polished mahogany table dominated the entire space, completely packed with people. 25 aunts, uncles, and older cousins sat shoulder to shoulder, sipping expensive champagne. The air was thick and suffocating, filled with the smell of rich buttery food, overpowering expensive perfume, and an overwhelming, aggressive hostility directed entirely at the empty chair waiting for me. Rowena sat at the absolute head of the table, treating the expensive dinner like a royal tribunal where she was the undisputed queen. She was dabbing her perfectly dry eyes with a white cloth napkin, playing the devastated, long-suffering matriarch to absolute, sickening perfection. Callista sat directly beside her, practically vibrating with an arrogant, highly nervous energy. Spread out meticulously on the table directly in front of them was a thick, legally binding stack of documents. I could easily read the bold, black heading from where I stood at the door. Property transfer deed, absolute relinquishment. Sitting right on top of the paper, reflecting the chandelier light, was a heavy, silver fountain pen. The very moment I stepped fully into the room and the heavy wooden door clicked shut behind me, sealing us in, the entire table erupted into a chaotic, deafening symphony of pure venom. Aunt Delphine immediately stood up, knocking her chair back, pointing a manicured, shaking finger right at my face. You should be absolutely ashamed of yourself, Linnea. Look at what you have done to your poor, suffering mother. You are a selfish, greedy little brat. Uncle Thaddeus slammed his heavy fist violently on the mahogany table, causing the crystal wine glasses to rattle dangerously and spill red wine onto the white cloth. Sit down, shut your mouth, and sign the damn papers immediately. You are going to fix this horrific mess right now. You owe this family your life, and it is time you finally paid your massive debt. Callista leaned heavily forward, a nasty, triumphant, incredibly ugly smirk playing on her glossed lips. She looked me up and down, taking in my tailored suit, and dramatically rolled her eyes. You always have to pretend you are so much better than us, do you not? You always have to be the difficult one. Just sign the house over, Linnea. It is the absolute least you can do after being such a massive, embarrassing disappointment your entire life. Mom is losing everything because you refuse to support our family's vibrational growth and my company's temporary liquidity issues. You're sickening. I pulled out the single empty wooden chair at the exact opposite end of the long table and sat down in total, unbroken, terrifying silence. I did not defend myself. I did not scream back. I did not shed a single, pathetic tear. I simply crossed my legs smoothly, folded my hands neatly in my lap, and let them scream. I let them hurl their toxic, baseless insults, their wild accusations, and their pure venom for 10 full, agonizingly loud minutes. I sat there completely motionless, like a stone statue in a hurricane, while they called me a monster, a sociopath, a greedy parasite, and a terrible daughter. I needed them completely, fundamentally committed to the elaborate illusion. I needed them to firmly and publicly lock themselves inside the heavy steel cage of Rowena's lies. The deeper they dug their aggressive heels in, the more devastating and absolute the final collapse would be. I was a forensic underwriter, and I was mentally tallying up their emotional debt. Finally, as their voices began to grow genuinely hoarse and the initial, massive wave of artificial outrage began to settle into heavy breathing, the opulent room fell into an incredibly heavy, suffocating, expectant silence. Every single pair of eyes in the room, 25 angry relatives, was locked entirely onto me, waiting for me to break. Rowena looked slowly down the entire length of the table at me, her eyes flashing with a predatory, victorious, utterly fake triumph. She pushed the thick stack of property deeds and the heavy silver pen down the polished wood, sliding them directly in front of my folded hands. "We are all waiting, Linnea," she said, her voice dripping with fake, sickeningly sweet sorrow and manipulation. "Do the right thing for once in your miserable life. Save your family from the streets. Sign the deed to the estate right now, and we might, eventually, find it in our generous hearts to forgive you for this horrible trauma you have caused us." I looked down at the silver pen resting mere inches from my hand. I slowly looked back up, making direct, unwavering eye contact with my mother. "Are you quite finished?" I asked, my voice cutting through the quiet room like a surgical blade. It was not loud. It was not a scream. But it carried an undeniable, terrifying, icy weight that made Aunt Delphine physically flinch. I did not reach for the silver pen. Instead, I reached deep into the inside breast pocket of my tailored jacket. I pulled out my smartphone, smoothly unlocked the glowing screen, and opened the massive family group chat that they had been using to publicly crucify me all week long. I tapped the photo gallery icon. I had spent 3 solid hours the previous night meticulously building a high-resolution, undeniable digital collage. It was a masterpiece of forensic accounting and pure revenge. On the left side of the image was the official, heavily stamped notice of default from the bank, clearly showing Rowena's unpaid $900,000 loan that she had secretly taken out against her supposedly fully paid house. On the right side of the image was the official, tracked bank wire transfer log showing exactly $400,000 moving directly from Grandma Theodora's restricted, legally protected medical trust fund into the corporate checking account of Callista's fake essential oil company. In the dead center of the collage, circled in bright, undeniable, thick red ink, was the official signature on the wire transfer authorization. Right below it, for immediate comparison, I had placed a certified, legitimate copy of Grandma Theodora's actual signature. The forgery on the wire transfer was incredibly clumsy, visibly desperate, and unmistakably written in Rowena's looping, messy handwriting. And across the very top of the entire image, I had typed one single, simple, devastating question in massive bold letters. Where exactly did Grandma's medical money go, Rowena? I held my thumb hovering gently over the send button. I looked around the room at the 25 angry, self-righteous faces aggressively staring back at me. They desperately wanted a grand show. I was about to give them an absolute, unforgettable massacre. What exactly happens when 25 aggressive people simultaneously realize they are actively protecting a federal criminal? I pressed the send button. The heavy, expectant silence in the opulent private dining room was instantly, violently shattered by a terrifying, synchronized wave of digital sound. 25 cell phones chimed, beeped, buzzed, and rang in absolute, chaotic unison around the massive mahogany table. It sounded exactly like a digital alarm system going off in a rapidly sinking submarine. I sat perfectly still, my hands resting comfortably back in my lap, leaning slightly against the chair, and watched the brutal execution unfold in real time. Aunt Delphine was the very first person to pick up her phone from the table. She let out a loud, annoyed huff, clearly expecting it to be another one of my mother's dramatic, woe is me updates. I watched her heavily mascaraed eyes track slowly across the bright digital collage. I watched the initial, mild confusion deeply furrow her brow. Then, I watched as the blood completely, entirely drained from her face, leaving her skin the sickening color of old, wet parchment. Her jaw literally dropped open, her breath catching violently in her throat with a sharp, incredibly loud, audible gasp. Uncle Thaddeus, who actually worked as a senior municipal accountant and understood complex financial documents and bank logs far better than anyone else in the room, practically snatched his phone off the table. He zoomed in closely on the bank documents on the left. He swiped and zoomed in on the bright red circle highlighting the forged signature in the center. He stared at the glowing screen for a full, agonizing 30 seconds. His eyes darted frantically back and forth between the massive $900,000 real estate debt and the $400,000 illegal wire theft from his own elderly mother's restricted medical fund. The carefully constructed illusion in the room shattered into a million irreparable, jagged, bloody pieces. The suffocating atmosphere of self-righteous, unified family anger evaporated in an instant, immediately replaced by sheer, unadulterated, panicked horror. What the hell is this? Uncle Thaddeus whispered, his voice trembling so violently that the entire silent table could clearly hear it. His face rapidly morphed from a ruddy, aggressive red into a sickly, terrifyingly pale white. He slowly, mechanically raised his heavy head and looked directly down the table at Rowena. Rowena, look at me. What the hell is this document? Rowena gasped loudly, her hand flying up frantically to clutch her signature pearl necklace as she looked down at her own buzzing phone. The carefully practiced mask of the devastated, loving matriarch slipped entirely, falling completely off her face and shattering on the floor. Staring back at the completely silent family was the terrified, cornered, incredibly guilty criminal hiding underneath. Her eyes grew massively wide with pure, unfiltered panic. She opened her mouth to speak, to spin a lie, to defend herself, but only a pathetic, dry, squeaking sound came out. Callista aggressively knocked over her heavy crystal water glass in her sudden, violent panic. The freezing ice water spilled all over the expensive white tablecloth, soaking directly into the property transfer deeds she had so eagerly brought to steal my life. It is fake, she shrieked, her voice cracking with wild desperation. She tried to push her heavy wooden chair back from the table, her designer heels slipping loudly on the polished hardwood floor. Linnea manufactured all of this. She hacked into my company computer to ruin my brand. It is a toxic, jealous lie. Do not look at it. Delete the picture. Absolutely no one was listening to her frantic screaming. The aggressive flying monkeys were suddenly, violently waking up from the toxic spell they had been under for decades. Aunt Delphine turned her entire body toward Rowena, her eyes wide with profound shock and deep betrayal. You explicitly told us your house was fully paid off 5 years ago. You swore to us that Linnea was maliciously buying your debt in secret. This official document says you voluntarily took out a $900,000 cash loan 2 years ago. And the wire transfer. Rowena, did you actually steal from Mom's medical trust? Did you forge her signature? I did not. Rowena finally screamed, her voice incredibly shrill and entirely unhinged. She slammed both of her hands violently on the table, rattling the silverware. Linnea is a sociopath. She is trying to frame me with fake internet documents so she doesn't have to help her own sister survive. She is a liar. I stood up slowly, deliberately taking my time, smoothing the front of my tailored jacket with agonizing, calculated precision. I looked down the table at the two of them. I did not raise my voice to match their hysterical screaming. I spoke with the calm, devastating, absolute authority of a federal judge handing down a final, inescapable death sentence. I will not give you the legal deed to my $2.5 million commercial home just to keep you out of a federal penitentiary for aggressively, maliciously defrauding our grandmother, I said, my voice echoing loudly in the suddenly, terrifyingly dead silent room. Everyone stared at me. You completely drained your own house of equity to secretly fund Callista's disgusting, out-of-control gambling addiction in Macau. And when that $900,000 vanished in offshore casinos, you panicked. You forged Grandma Theodora's signature to steal $400,000 directly from her end-of-life medical care fund. You did not want my house to live in to escape the cold. You actively hired a black market broker to sell my estate for pennies on the dollar to cover up a staggering federal crime before the state auditors found out about the missing trust money. You lying, jealous, vindictive little brat. Rowena shrieked, pointing a violently trembling finger at me, tears of pure, desperate rage streaming down her face, completely ruining her perfect, expensive makeup. I will sue you for everything you have for defamation. I will destroy your career. The government knows absolutely nothing about this. It is a private family matter. Right on cue, exactly as Grandma Theodora had planned, as if guided by absolute divine timing, a tall, older man wearing a sharp, impeccably tailored gray suit stood up from a small, dimly lit two-top table situated just outside the open double doors of our private dining room. He walked slowly, purposefully into the room, holding a thick leather briefcase. He pulled a heavy gold badge from his inside jacket pocket and let it hang from a chain around his neck, the metal catching the light of the chandelier. Actually, Mrs. Rowena, the man said, his voice incredibly deep, booming and entirely devoid of any sympathy or emotion. We know absolutely everything. The entire table collectively gasped, the sound sucking the remaining air out of the room. I smiled, a small, cold, satisfied smile. Grandma Theodora had brilliantly kept her promise. Gideon Vance, the senior state financial auditor, had been sitting right outside the room the entire time, eating a steak and listening to every single desperate, incriminating word they screamed. My mother constantly claimed I was maliciously destroying the family. But how exactly do you react when the federal government steps into the room to finish the job for you? Gideon Vance stepped fully into the bright light of the massive crystal chandeliers, his imposing presence completely dominating the chaotic, panic-stricken room. He looked at Rowena and Callista with an expression of pure, unfiltered professional disgust. He did not look at them like they were people. He looked at them like they were an incredibly messy, fraudulent ledger that he was about to aggressively balance. My name is Gideon Vance, he announced clearly, his voice carrying effortlessly to the back of the room as he held up a thick stack of official, heavily sealed legal folders bearing government insignias. I am a senior investigative auditor with the State Financial Regulatory Board, currently working in direct conjunction with federal authorities. Mrs. Rowena, as of exactly 4 o'clock this afternoon, a federal judge has signed a complete, mandatory, and immediate freeze on all of your personal banking accounts, your credit lines, and any associated corporate assets. This explicitly includes the entirely fraudulent LLC operated by your daughter, Callista, which was used to launder stolen domestic trust funds into offshore gambling accounts. Rowena's legs completely gave out beneath her. She collapsed heavily back into her dining chair, her hands shaking so violently she knocked over her own wine glass, sending a dark red stain spreading rapidly across the white tablecloth. She frantically clutched her chest, breathing in rapid, incredibly shallow, dramatic gasps, attempting to aggressively fake a sudden medical emergency to escape the confrontation. "My heart," she wailed loudly, leaning over the table, her face contorted in faux agony. "I am having a massive heart attack. Someone call an ambulance right now. Please." Absolutely no one moved. Not a single person at that massive 25-person table reached into their pocket for their phone to help her. The exact same family members who had spent the entire week aggressively defending her, calling me a monster, and demanding I hand over my home, were now looking at her like she was covered in radioactive, toxic waste. Uncle Thaddeus stood up abruptly, roughly grabbing his heavy winter coat from the back of his chair. "You absolutely disgust me," he spat, pointing a shaking, furious finger directly at his own sister. "You actively stole from our mother. You stole from a disabled, elderly woman to fund this spoiled brat's gambling problem. You are completely dead to me. Do not ever contact my family again." He did not even look at me to apologize. He simply turned around and stormed rapidly out of the private dining room. His cell phone beeped loudly in his hand as he walked out. He had just formally exited the family group chat. Aunt Delphine was aggressively crying, real, heavy tears of profound embarrassment, shame, and shock completely ruining her mascara, leaving dark black streaks down her cheeks. She grabbed her expensive purse, entirely refusing to make even a second of eye contact with Rowena. "How could you possibly do this?" she whispered, her voice cracking with genuine emotion. "You made us all look like absolute, cruel fools. You aggressively manipulated us into attacking Linnea, into destroying her reputation in the neighborhood, while you were actively stealing hundreds of thousands of dollars from our mother. You are sick." She quickly followed Thaddeus out the heavy wooden doors. One by one, the aunts, uncles, and older cousins stood up in complete, suffocating silence. The only sounds remaining in the opulent room were the rustling of heavy winter coats being put on and the constant, rapid, rhythmic pinging of my cell phone as 25 relatives simultaneously exited the family chat. They were permanently, desperately severing their digital and social connection to my mother to avoid being implicated in the massive fallout. Within 3 short minutes, the massive, imposing mahogany table was entirely empty, save for Rowena, Callista, Gideon, and myself. The sudden, violent shift in power was absolute, undeniable, and breathtaking to witness. The aggressive, self-righteous mob that had intended to force me into total submission had completely evaporated into thin air, leaving the two predators entirely exposed, broke, and defenseless. Callista was actively hyperventilating, staring wildly at Gideon's federal badge as if it were a loaded weapon pointed directly at her forehead. "You cannot freeze my corporate accounts," she shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly in the empty, messy room. "I absolutely need that money to maintain my brand. I have massive investor meetings next week. I have international suppliers depending on my liquidity. You are ruining my life." "Miss Callista," Gideon said calmly, opening one of the thick folders and glancing at a document. "You do not have a brand. You do not have investors. You have a massive, undocumented gambling debt to unregulated, dangerous offshore casinos. And, because you knowingly accepted stolen trust funds across state lines through electronic wires to pay those debts, you are now officially implicated in a massive federal wire fraud conspiracy. I strongly suggest both of you stop talking immediately, leave this restaurant, and attempt to secure very expensive criminal defense attorneys. Though, considering your frozen assets, I imagine you will be relying on public defenders." Gideon turned to me, his stern face softening just a fraction, nodding slightly in respect. "Thank you for your swift cooperation, Linnea." The forensic evidence you and your grandmother provided was incredibly thorough and made securing these warrants very easy. We will be executing the physical search warrants at their residences first thing Tuesday morning. Have a good evening." He confidently closed his leather briefcase, turned around, and walked out of the restaurant, leaving a heavy, suffocating silence in his wake. I looked down the length of the table at my mother and my sister. They were sitting pathetically amidst the spilled ice water, the stained tablecloth, and the completely ruined property transfer deeds. They looked completely and utterly broken. The toxic, arrogant energy that had fueled their entire existence was entirely gone, replaced by the terrifying, paralyzing realization that their lives, as they knew them, were completely over. I did not say another word to them. I did not need to scream, or curse, or gloat. The total, absolute destruction of their reality was profoundly satisfying enough. I turned around, smoothed my tailored jacket one last time, and walked out of Le Petit, the click of my heels echoing on the hardwood floor. By the time I handed my valet ticket to the freezing attendant outside, I checked my phone. The toxic family group chat was entirely, beautifully empty. The only two people left in the digital room were Rowena and Callista. And I smiled as I hit the block button on both of their numbers before pulling my warm SUV out into the snowy night. They thought they could easily steal my future to cover their crimes. But what exactly happens when a predator realizes they are the ones securely locked inside the cage? The following Tuesday morning, exactly as Gideon had promised, the heavy steel trap my grandmother and I had meticulously set finally snapped completely shut with bone-crushing, inescapable force. I was sitting comfortably at my desk in my warm, quiet corporate office, sipping a fresh cup of coffee, when the local breaking news alerts started flashing rapidly on my phone screen. The federal authorities absolutely did not handle the situation quietly or discreetly. Because the stolen funds from Grandma Theodora's trust had crossed state lines into Callista's unregulated offshore gambling accounts, the entire situation was immediately elevated from a simple family dispute to severe federal wire fraud and massive elder exploitation. According to the frantic, all-caps text messages Aunt Delphine was now desperately trying to send me privately to get back on my good side, federal agents arrived at Rowena's massive, soon-to-be foreclosed suburban house at exactly 6 in the morning. They did not knock politely. They served a stack of aggressive search warrants. They systematically confiscated absolutely everything of value. They took Rowena's desktop computers, her carefully hidden fake financial records, her cell phones, and all of her expensive, heavily insured jewelry as collateral against the stolen trust funds. Because the official state audit revealed the massive, gaping $400,000 hole in the legally protected medical trust, the government immediately and permanently stripped Rowena of her role as trustee. She was officially indicted on multiple, severe felony charges of elder estate fraud, forgery, and embezzlement. The lending bank, seeing the massive federal indictment looming over the property and realizing they were never getting their $900,000 back, completely abandoned any pretense of patience. They rapidly accelerated the foreclosure process, skipping the standard grace periods. Within days, Rowena was officially, legally evicted from the beautiful home she had proudly bragged about for years. Her pristine, highly cultivated image in the local country club community was utterly and completely destroyed. She was facing a mandatory minimum sentencing in a federal precinct. Callista's situation was arguably much worse. Her fake company accounts were frozen entirely by the government. The federal agents literally seized her ridiculous $4,000 cashmere coat right out of her closet and towed her financed, bright red convertible sports car right out of her luxury apartment parking lot while her neighbors watched. Because she could not pay her exorbitant rent, her landlord immediately filed for eviction. She was left with absolutely nothing but a mountain of terrifying gambling debt to dangerous people and the cheap clothes on her back, facing massive conspiracy charges alongside our mother. The irony of the entire situation was incredibly sharp, providing a deeply, profoundly satisfying contrast. while their fake, toxic world was violently imploding, completely collapsing under the crushing weight of their own greed. My life was experiencing a beautiful, peaceful transition. With Rowena completely removed from the picture and facing prison time, the state secured and ensured the remainder of Grandma Theodora's medical fund. However, I absolutely did not want her staying in that assisted living facility any longer, surrounded by staff who had blindly believed my mother's aggressive lies about her mental state for years. I drove my SUV over to the assisted living center on a quiet, peaceful Friday afternoon. I had spent the entire week rapidly and aggressively renovating one of the beautiful, spacious ground-floor rental apartments on my $2.5 million estate. I installed custom wheelchair-accessible ramps, widened the doorways, completely remodeled the bathroom for safety, and hired a team of private, highly vetted in-home nurses to provide excellent, round-the-clock care using the newly secured trust funds. When I confidently walked into room 412, Grandma Theodora was already completely packed. She was sitting peacefully by the large window, her leather bags neatly stacked by the door, calmly holding her knitting needles, finishing the burgundy scarf. "Ready to finally leave this expensive prison, Linnea?" she asked, a genuine, warm, incredibly bright smile spreading across her weathered face. "Absolutely, Grandma," I replied, easily grabbing her heavy suitcases. "Let's go home." I moved her directly into the beautiful, warm apartment on my property. For the first time in my 33 years of life, I actually felt like I had a real, supportive family. We spent our evenings drinking hot chamomile tea, watching classic black and white movies by the fire, and talking about absolutely everything except the two toxic women who were currently out on bail, awaiting their federal trials. I truly thought the massive drama was completely over. I thought I would never have to see their lying faces again until a federal judge forced me to testify in court. I had my beautiful, secure home, a brilliant, thriving career, and a peaceful life that no amount of their toxic manipulation could ever touch again. But desperate, cornered people do not just disappear quietly into the night. They claw aggressively at whatever warmth they can find. And one night, during the absolute worst snowstorm of the year, my heavy brass doorbell finally rang. It was exactly 2 weeks after the devastating federal indictments had publicly dropped. The temperature in Minneapolis had plummeted to a brutal, unforgiving 10 degrees below zero. The violent winter wind was screaming outside, throwing massive, heavy sheets of freezing snow against the thick, reinforced glass of my living room windows. I was sitting comfortably on my expensive, deep green velvet sofa, a massive fire roaring in the large stone fireplace, quietly reviewing a complex commercial insurance file for work. Suddenly, the heavy brass doorbell echoed loudly and sharply through the quiet, peaceful house. I frowned, setting my laptop carefully aside on the coffee table. I walked slowly over to the front door, shivering slightly as the intense cold draft seeped aggressively through the floorboards. I flipped on the bright exterior porch light and looked cautiously through the small glass peephole. Standing on my front porch, entirely exposed to the freezing, violent, blinding snowstorm, were Rowena and Callista. They looked completely and utterly hollowed out. There was absolutely no trace of the aggressive, entitled arrogance left in their posture. Rowena was not wearing her signature pearl necklace. She was wrapped tightly in a cheap, thin, gray blanket over a worn, ugly winter coat. Callista was shivering violently, her expensive makeup completely washed away, her hair matted with snow, looking incredibly small, weak, and pathetic. They looked exactly like the helpless victims they had always aggressively pretended to be to manipulate others. I unlocked the heavy metal deadbolt and slowly pulled the solid wooden door open, just a few inches, leaving the heavy brass security chain firmly in place. The freezing, biting wind immediately whipped violently into the warm foyer, stinging my face with ice crystals. "Linnea," Rowena sobbed immediately, her voice trembling uncontrollably over the howling wind. She completely collapsed, falling heavily to her knees on the icy concrete porch, weeping hysterically, clutching her freezing bare hands together in a desperate pleading motion. "Please, please, God, let us in." The bank officially took the house today. Callista's landlord threw her out yesterday. We have absolutely nowhere else to go. We have no money. We are freezing to death out here. Callista stood weakly behind her, wrapping her arms tightly around herself, completely refusing to meet my eyes, staring down at her ruined shoes. "Please, Linnea," she mumbled, her teeth loudly and violently chattering. "Just the garage. Let us sleep on the floor in the heated garage. We will not bother you. We will leave in the morning. Please." I stood there in the warm, golden glow of my beautiful foyer, looking down at the two people who had spent my entire life treating me like absolute dirt. I looked at the exact women who had actively, maliciously tried to steal everything I had built with my bare hands. I looked at the women who had happily tried to leave me homeless just to cover up a massive federal crime, who had mercilessly robbed an elderly, disabled woman blind to fund luxury vacations and gambling habits. I searched my heart deeply for a shred of pity. I searched for lingering familial love. I searched for anger or even a desire to scream at them. I found absolutely nothing. I felt nothing but a cold, incredibly peaceful, absolute silence. I did not scream at them. I did not curse them out into the storm. That would mean I still cared enough to be emotionally affected by their presence. That would mean they still had power over me. Instead, I reached calmly into the pocket of my heavy, warm wool cardigan and pulled out a crisp, neatly folded piece of paper. I slipped it carefully through the narrow crack in the door, letting the wind catch it and flutter it down onto the icy porch, landing right in front of Rowena's freezing knees. "What is this?" Rowena whispered, looking down at the paper through her tears, her hands shaking too much to pick it up. "It is a formal, itemized invoice," I said, my voice completely flat, steady, and entirely devoid of any emotion. "I am officially billing you for 50 hours of investigative work at my standard corporate consulting fee of $300 an hour. That $15,000 bill is for the incredibly tedious time I spent unwinding your fraudulent, disgusting financial web to save my own property from your illegal black market sale. You can send a check when you figure out how to survive." Rowena stared up at me, her mouth hanging wide open in pure shock, the heavy snowflakes catching in her messy, unstyled hair. "You cannot be serious. We are your blood. We are your family. We will die out here. There is a fully funded, state-run emergency homeless shelter exactly 5 miles down Elm Street," I said, ignoring her manipulative tears completely. "I highly suggest you start walking right now before the roads freeze completely solid. Do not ever step foot on my property again." I pushed the heavy oak door completely shut, the sound echoing loudly like a judge's heavy wooden gavel dropping in an empty, quiet courtroom. I slid the metal deadbolt firmly into place with a satisfying, heavy click, sealing them out in the cold where they belonged. I walked slowly back into my warm, brightly lit living room. Grandma Theodora had rolled her wheelchair out of her private apartment and was sitting comfortably near the roaring fireplace, sipping a fresh cup of chamomile tea. A soft, genuine, peaceful smile rested on her weathered face. "Is it cold outside, dear?" she asked quietly, not looking toward the front door. "Freezing," I replied, easily picking my laptop back up and sitting down on the soft velvet sofa. "But it is perfectly, wonderfully warm in here." For the first time in 33 years, I was completely, undeniably free. The heavy, toxic anchor that had dragged me down my entire life had finally been cut loose. Blood only makes you related by absolute biological accident. Loyalty, respect, and integrity are the only things that truly make you family. When the exact people who are supposedly obligated to protect and love you decide to maliciously throw you to the wolves to save themselves, you absolutely do not owe them your warmth. You let the winter take them. Have you ever had to draw a permanent, unbreakable line with toxic family members who only remembered your incredible value when they desperately needed someone to save them from the brutal consequences of their own terrible choices? Do you think I was too cruel for shutting the door on them in a massive blizzard, or was it exactly what they deserved after trying to ruin my life? Tell me your story and your honest thoughts in the comments below. Do not forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another incredible story of absolute revenge. Thank you for listening, and until next time, stay strong and always guard your peace.